The meeting wasn't announced as a meeting. My parents called it a quick family update, which in our house meant decisions had already been made and explanations would follow if they were offered at all. We sat around the dining table with no decorations, no special food, no ceremony. Just papers stacked neatly in front of my father, a pen aligned to the edge of a folder, and my sister Elaine tapping her foot with the impatience of someone who already knew the outcome would favor her. My name is Lily. I had learned, over the years, to read rooms like this one. The air tightens when something unequal is about to be called practical. Voices soften when favoritism needs to sound reasonable. Dad cleared his throat. "We've been reviewing our finances," he said. "Long-term planning. Assets. What makes sense going forward?" Mom nodded beside him, hands folded, eyes steady but careful. Elaine leaned forward. "Is something wrong?" "No," Mom said quickly. "Nothing's wrong. This is proactive." That word again. Proactive. Dad slid the folder across the table toward Elaine. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it obvious who the conversation centered on. "Open it," he said. Elaine opened the folder and scanned the first page. Her eyebrows lifted, not in shock, but in recognition. Like she'd been expecting confirmation. "Oh," she said softly. "You did it." Dad smiled. "It's finalized." She flipped to the next page. Registration details. Insurance. Ownership transfer. Numbers printed cleanly at the bottom. $158,000. It wasn't an object on display. There was nothing to look at. The weight of it lived in ink and signatures, the kind of thing that changes someone's daily life without ever needing to be shown. Elaine exhaled, then laughed. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." Mom reached over and squeezed her hand. "You need something reliable. Something that reflects where you're headed." I watched quietly. Not because I was stunned. Because I recognized the pattern. Dad turned to me next. "Lily, we didn't forget you." "Of course." He slid a small envelope in my direction. Thin. Light. "This is for you," he said. "We thought it would be useful." Useful is the word people choose when generosity would be dishonest. I opened the envelope. Inside was a card with a prepaid balance, modest, capped, time-limited. A note attached in Mom's handwriting, for expenses. "We know you're independent." Independent. That was how they framed distance when it benefited them. I nodded once. "Thank you." Elaine glanced at my envelope, then back to her folder. "This makes sense," she said, reassuring herself as much as anyone else. "I commute a lot. And Lily's always said she doesn't need much." I hadn't said that. I had said I didn't need help that came with strings. Dad leaned back. "Fair is fair," he said. "Different needs." Fair is fair, another phrase meant to close discussion. I looked at the papers in front of Elaine again. The car wasn't a gift. It was a decision. An allocation. A vote of confidence backed by money that had never required my input. My envelope was the opposite. Temporary. Conditional. Easy to forget. The room waited for me to react. To joke. To protest. To perform gratitude loudly enough to make the imbalance feel acceptable. I didn't. "I understand," I said. Mom's shoulders dropped, relieved. "Good." The meeting ended quickly after that. Dad gathered the papers. Elaine tucked the folder under her arm like proof. Chairs scraped. The house returned to its usual quiet. I stayed seated. Not frozen. Thinking. Because while they were deciding what Elaine needed, they hadn't asked what I carried. They hadn't noticed that for years I'd been the one coordinating logistics, smoothing conflicts, managing schedules, covering gaps when plans fell apart. I wasn't dependent, but I was essential in ways that never showed up on paper. I stood, slipped the envelope into my bag, and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Mom asked. "I'm heading out," I said. "I've got things to do." Elaine looked up. "Already?" "Yes." Dad frowned slightly. "You don't have to rush." "I'm not," I replied. At the door, I paused, not for drama, but for clarity. "I appreciate the thought," I said, meeting my parents' eyes. "But I won't be using this." I placed the envelope on the entry table. Not pushed back. Not tossed aside. Left. Then I stepped outside. The air felt lighter immediately. As I walked down the driveway, I didn't feel angry. I felt resolved. The difference mattered. They had made their choice in ink and signatures. I made mine in silence. And while they believed the value of that meeting was measured in dollars and assets, I understood something else entirely. The moment you stop accepting a version of yourself someone else benefits from, you take your power back. I didn't announce my exit. I didn't send messages or explain myself. I didn't need distance to be dramatic, it needed to be effective. So I let silence do what explanations never had. The first day passed without incident. The second felt oddly calm. By the third, the cracks appeared. It started small. A call from my mother, missed while I was in a meeting. A text that followed 10 minutes later. Did you take the insurance documents with you? I read it twice before replying. No. Another pause. Then, do you remember where they're filed? I did. I always did. But instead of answering immediately, I asked a question of my own. Which ones? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. The ones for Elaine's car, she wrote. Your father can't find the digital copies. I stared at the message. They hadn't asked me to help plan the purchase. They hadn't asked me to review the terms. They hadn't asked me to compare insurance tiers or negotiate coverage. But they assumed I'd still know where everything was. I replied calmly. Check the folder Dad created on his desktop. If they're not there, the dealership should have copies. That was true. Mostly. An hour later, my father called. Lily, he said, skipping pleasantries, we're having trouble finalizing a few things. With the car? I asked. With everything, he admitted. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of trouble? He hesitated. The insurer wants confirmation. The dealership says paperwork is missing. Elaine's upset because she can't pick it up yet. Pick it up. So the car still wasn't even in her possession. It's all very complicated, he added. It was, I said. That's why I usually handled it. Silence. You're not here anymore, he said finally. I know, I replied. That night, Elaine messaged me directly. Are you seriously doing this? Doing what? I asked. Leaving us to figure everything out, she replied. This is petty. Petty. That word always came out when inconvenience finally reached her. You got what you wanted, she continued. Why make things harder? I stared at the screen, then typed slowly. I didn't make anything harder. I stopped making it easy. She didn't respond. Over the next week, the house grew louder without me ever stepping inside it. Appointments were missed because no one synced calendars. Deadlines slipped because emails went unanswered. Small problems multiplied because there was no one smoothing them out before they became visible. My parents started disagreeing over things they'd never argued about before. Who was supposed to call whom? Who handled which account? Who had agreed to what? Elaine, for the first time, had to participate. And she hated it. She called me again a few days later, voice sharp. You could at least help Mom, she said. She's stressed. I can explain things, I replied. I'm not stepping back into managing. So what, you're just done with us, she snapped. No, I said. I'm done being assumed. That weekend, my parents asked me to come over. Just to talk, Mom said. No pressure. I agreed. Not because I wanted reconciliation. Because I wanted clarity. When I arrived, the house felt different. Papers spread across the dining table. Laptops open. A half-assembled attempt at organization. Dad looked tired. Mom looked cautious. Elaine looked annoyed. We didn't realize how much you handled, Dad said once we were seated. I believe you, I replied. We thought we were being fair, Mom added. Different needs, different support. You were being consistent, I said. That's not the same thing. Elaine scoffed. So what, you wanted a car too? I met her eyes. I wanted to be seen. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Dad rubbed his temples. This isn't about keeping score. It never was, I said. It's about who carries weight. And who gets credit. Mom reached for my hand. We didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said gently. But intent doesn't erase impact. They asked me to help again. Not directly. Carefully. What would it take for you to be more involved? Dad asked. I smiled, not unkindly. It would take a different structure, I said. Clear roles. Clear boundaries. No assumptions. Elaine crossed her arms. So now you want rules? I always did, I replied. You just didn't need them before. That meeting ended without resolution. But something had shifted. They no longer spoke to me like someone who would automatically step in. There was hesitation now. Awareness. The beginning of understanding that access to me was not a given. The next week, the dealership called my parents directly. Not to celebrate. To correct. Insurance coverage wasn't finalized. Registration had an error. The timeline slipped again. Elaine exploded. This shouldn't be this hard, she shouted, pacing the living room. People do this all the time. My mother snapped back for the first time. People usually plan, she said. That argument echoed through the house long after I left. And with every delay, every misstep, one truth became harder to ignore. The $158,000 decision had been bold. But bold decisions require infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't appear just because money does. I didn't take satisfaction in their stress. I took confirmation. Because the imbalance wasn't just emotional. It was operational. They had invested heavily in what looked impressive and underestimated what quietly kept things running. And as the consequences stacked up, I could see it clearly. They hadn't lost me when I walked away. They lost the version of me that made their choices effortless. The problem with quiet exits is that they don't announce consequences. They arrive gradually. Through missed calls, postponed plans, and conversations that keep circling the same unresolved questions. By the time people realize what changed, they can't point to a single moment. They can only feel the absence. 2 weeks after I left, my father called again. Not urgent. Not accusatory. Measured. We need to talk, he said. All of us. I agreed. When I walked into the house, the table was clear this time. No folders. No laptops. Just 3 chairs pulled close together, as if proximity might substitute for preparation. Elaine sat with her arms folded, jaw tight. My mother kept smoothing the edge of a napkin. My father waited until we were all seated. We made assumptions, he said, about how things would continue. I nodded. You did. We assumed you'd still help, my mother added softly. Help is voluntary, I said. Management is work. Elaine exhaled sharply. You're acting like we exploited you. I met her eyes. You did. Gently. Consistently. Without asking. She looked away. Dad leaned forward. We didn't realize the scale of what you handled. The coordination. The follow-through. We thought it was just details. Details are systems, I replied. Systems are stability. Silence settled. We're struggling, my mother admitted. Not just with paperwork. With each other. That was new. Elaine scoffed. This isn't about her. The car just hasn't. The car is part of it, Dad interrupted. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. We made a large decision quickly. We didn't plan for everything that came after. Elaine bristled. So now it's my fault? No, he said. It's ours. I watched my sister closely. For the first time, the certainty she usually wore like armor had cracked. Not shattered, cracked. Enough to let doubt in. Dad turned to me. We want to fix this. Fix what? I asked. He paused. The imbalance. That requires more than an apology, I said. It requires change. My mother nodded. We know. They asked me what that change would look like. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I wanted to be precise. I won't manage things informally anymore, I said. No stepping in just this once. No quiet fixes. If you want my help, it needs to be defined, compensated, and optional. Elaine laughed, sharp and incredulous. So now you want to be paid? I always was, I replied calmly. You just didn't notice. That landed. Dad sat back. And if we don't? Then nothing changes, I said. You'll learn. It will be slower. Messier. But you'll learn. Another silence. He looked at my mother. She nodded once. We want to do this properly, she said. I stood. Then start by understanding this. I took the envelope I'd left weeks earlier from my bag and placed it on the table. I didn't walk away because of money, I said. I walked away because I tapped the envelope, wasn't respect. It was convenience. Elaine stared at it. So what now? Now, I said, You decide how you want your family to work, without assuming I'll fill the gaps. I left them to talk. Over the next month, things changed slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. My parents hired help. Real help. They learned to document decisions. They split responsibilities instead of handing them off to whoever complained the least. Elaine struggled the most. She had to coordinate her own appointments, follow up on her own issues, deal with delays without someone smoothing them away. It made her irritable, then quieter, then eventually competent. One afternoon, she called me. Not angry, not defensive. I didn't realize how much you did, she said. I know, I replied. I thought independence meant not needing anyone, she continued. I didn't see how much you were carrying. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry, she added. That was enough. The car situation resolved eventually. Not elegantly, but correctly. It took time, money, attention. The kind of effort I used to give freely. I didn't step back in. And because I didn't, they finally built something that didn't depend on me disappearing into the background. Months later, my father asked me to dinner, just him and my mother. We want you involved, he said. But on your terms. I smiled. That's the only way it works. As I drove home that night, I thought about the meeting where it all began. The papers, the numbers, the quiet certainty with which they'd decided who needed what. They had believed the biggest choice was the most expensive one. They were wrong. The real shift happened when I stopped accepting a smaller role just because it made things easier for everyone else. They gave my sister a $158,000 car. I left my gift and walked away. And in doing so, I took back something far more valuable than anything that could be signed or insured: my authority over my own life.